Based on all the comments that you guys are leaving on my channel, it's really clear that there's a lot of misinformation going on about what happens in recruiting and hiring. And in this video, I'm going to clear up the most common myths. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to dispel some of these myths that I see going around and around about how hiring works. And it's quite fascinating to me that some people are so adamant in declaring that they know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, and I'm sitting there scratching my head saying, oh really? Is that really how it works? And listen, I fully understand that it's easy to jump to conclusions when you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes because maybe you have a limited perspective. You may never have been formally involved in the hiring process, maybe as a recruiter or a hiring manager. But a lot of these myths are not serving to help people who are actually looking for jobs, and so I want to take some time to dispel some of the most common ones that I'm seeing, because at best they're a source of frustration for the job seeker, and at worst some of them are actually kind of reckless. But before we get into that, if you're interested in learning more about what goes on behind the scenes in recruiting directly from a corporate recruiter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. And I'd also like to thank today's sponsor, Delete Me. More on them in a minute. Listen, I see the comments that y'all are leaving on my videos, on my LinkedIn posts, and it is very obvious that people are very frustrated with employers, with the job search process, with careers in general, and quite frankly, I can't blame them. Companies have not really done themselves any favors for how they have treated employees over the last several years in particular. And there's not a guidebook for any of this stuff, so it's easy to jump to conclusions if you don't understand what's truly happening behind the scenes. And one of the most common misconceptions that I see is how companies use applicant tracking systems, or you may hear it as ATS systems. And in particular, they'll say, well, when you apply to a job, you just use automation, you just use AI, and you don't actually look at my resume. It doesn't even get seen. Well, I just made another video about what typically happens behind the scenes as far as your application is concerned. So if you haven't seen that one, check the previous video out. But the reality is that applicant tracking systems 99% of the time are not making any hiring decisions on you. The applicant tracking system is simply a computer system or a software that companies, and in particular recruiters, use just to manage all of the applicant flow, all the data. If you can imagine a company that has hundreds of job postings and thousands of candidates coming in and out of every job requisition or job posting, you can imagine the volume of data, and there's simply no possible way to manage hiring in any kind of an efficient manner by doing the old paper and pencil, especially in today's job market where everything is electronic. People are taking their proverbial shot. They're applying for jobs that they don't qualify for at all. And companies are inundated with resumes. The fact of the matter is that ATS systems, 99% of the time, are not going to be rejecting you and making a decision on your candidacy based on what you write on your application. The only time that I have ever used an ATS system to auto-filter somebody out is if they don't meet certain requirements. And this is usually very core basic requirements like, are you at least 18 years of age, or are you legally able to work in the country that you're applying to? But that's the base level. Now, I will say it is possible for the recruiter to program in additional kick-out questions, and you'll usually see them in the form of a text box that you'll have to complete. In those cases, they're exceedingly rare, especially for bigger companies who are more reputable. And frankly, I feel that it's lazy recruiting to let the ATS system screen people out for you. But if you're applying to a big company and they haven't filled the job yet, you can almost assuredly guarantee that they're going to be looking at your resume in some shape, form, or fashion. Now, it's probably pretty quick, and they may only spend 5 or 6 seconds on it, which is why it's crucial to have a very targeted, optimized resume. But nonetheless, I was always screening every single resume that came across my desk, and all of my recruiter colleagues were doing the same thing. We didn't want to take the risk of an applicant tracking system filtering people into a rejection bucket without us being able to put eyes on it first. Now, with the rise of AI and companies eliminating a lot of their recruiting teams over the last 2 years, you may actually start to see more and more cases of these systems auto-filtering out based on some parameters or the system actually becoming self-aware in some level. But again, in most cases, the ATS system today is not making those decisions. And another great myth is that your hiring data is secure. Did you know that there's a high likelihood of the information that you provide in job applications and your new hire data, including your address, your social security number, your compensation information, and all this personal information that you provide the company, is actually being shared with a company like Equifax. They have a database called the Work Number, which verifies all of your employment data, and employers often use this to make sure you are who you say you are. The problem is that the same company sells your data to anybody who wants to buy it, and you don't have much recourse. And trying to find your data on the World Wide Web, especially with all these massive data breaches that keep on happening, it can be nearly impossible, like whack-a-mole. Fortunately, Delete Me has come up with a solution to help you find your information and scrub it from the web. So what they do is they scour and monitor the web looking for instances where your information is pulling up in public databases. In other words, data brokers buying your information and then trying to make it available for resale. And they will go and delete these instances. And when they begin the monitoring process, you'll get reports emailed to you telling you about the activities, how many times your information has been found, and what they're doing to automatically scrub it for you. And the system is super easy and convenient. And it's just an added layer of protection so that I can ensure that my personal information is secure. And if you're interested in signing up for their service, you can get a 20% discount by using the code LAYOFF. I will leave a link down in the comments below. And that leads me to the second myth, which is that you can beat the ATS system. There's all these little tips and hacks and tricks that people are sharing as if it's gospel. And if you just do these certain things, you're going to be able to get past the ATS system and get into the hiring process. And here's the deal. I've seen all the hacks and I kind of just chuckle to myself because it's clear that people don't know how the ATS system works. When you go into your application or your resume and you just stuff a bunch of keywords in there, hoping that the ATS system is going to just filter that and then move you into the yes bucket, you're probably going to be spinning a lot of wheels. The same thing goes for adding text to the bottom of your resume that's white so we can't see it with all the keywords or even the job description. And here's the deal. If you do that and the recruiter searches for a specific keyword as a search term, you may pull up in their search. But if your keyword doesn't have any context to it, they're going to be able to tell that you're not qualified for the role. And quite frankly, they're getting pretty sophisticated. They realize that people are trying to game the system and it just doesn't work. And in fact, it could hurt your candidacy. So your best bet is just to forget all about beating the ATS system, write a solid resume, and make sure that you deliver it in a clear and concise fashion. Which leads me to the next myth, which is that recruiters love to reject your resume. This one's a personal favorite of mine. Like, we don't have anything better in our lives to do than wake up and say, who am I going to reject today? Because that's simply not how it works. Recruiters are graded on a time to fill metric. In other words, their job is dependent on them filling positions in a timely and efficient manner. If the recruiter doesn't hit their time to fill metric, which is the time that a job is opened until the time that an offer is accepted, then they're likely going to have a sit down with their boss to discuss their performance. And therefore, it's in the recruiter's best interest to make sure that they're finding candidates that closely match the role as quickly as they can. So in other words, recruiters want you to get the job. They want you to do well in the interview, and they want you to get to the point of offer and hopefully accepting it. And I know it doesn't feel this way at times, but recruiters have no incentive to reject your resume if you're a well-qualified candidate. And oftentimes people think that recruiters are just overly picky or don't know what it is that they're looking for. Now, I can't say that all recruiters know what they're looking for because oftentimes they're handed jobs they've never recruited before, and they're still expected by their boss to jump right in and start to learn the position as quickly as they can. So oftentimes you may find a recruiter that doesn't have as much knowledge as the candidate. In fact, they shouldn't have as much knowledge as the candidate because the candidate is the one who is doing the job. The recruiter is looking to fill the position, but the hiring manager is the one who is coming up with the list of criteria that they want to see in a candidate. So oftentimes, if a recruiter is being overly picky, it's because the hiring manager is being overly picky, and it can feel very frustrating as a result. So best bet, make sure that you read through the job posting as closely as you can, try to understand what it is that they're looking for, and try to present yourself as the best possible fit. Which leads me to the next myth, is that people assume that recruiters hire. Here's the thing, the recruiter never hires anybody. The hiring manager hires them. That's why their title is called the hiring manager. The recruiter is simply managing the process of recruiting. They're taking the job order, they're going out and finding the candidate, and they're basically managing it through the rest of the process. They're kind of handling all the logistics. That's the recruiter's job. The hiring manager's job is to actually hire the person onto their team. So in a way, the recruiter is acting as an agent. Now, I want to make an important distinction here. A headhunter is different than a recruiter, and I'm talking about an internal corporate recruiter. The corporate recruiter works for the company. They are an employee. They get a paycheck from the company, just like everybody else. They get paid benefits and all that stuff. The headhunter is a third party that the recruiter typically engages in order to assist in filling particularly difficult to fill jobs. Because the headhunter doesn't have a seat at the table, in other words, they're not typically in the intake calls, they're not typically in the debrief meetings, they're not in the offer process meetings, all these behind the scenes meetings that happen with the hiring manager that typically the internal corporate recruiter is, they often have a very limited perspective. It's kind of on a need to know basis. And so oftentimes the third party headhunter doesn't have a lot of information either. So it can feel very frustrating working with them, even though it may not be their fault because they just aren't as close to the process. But if you do find yourself working with a headhunter, and to a lesser extent the corporate recruiter, here's another myth: that the headhunter's job is to find you a job. The headhunter's job is actually to find a candidate for the job that they're recruiting. There is a very important difference here, and I think that this is the source of great disconnect. People assume that the headhunter is their personal agent to go off and find them a job. In reality, they're actually being hired by the company to fill the role. So you may feel special for a moment if you apply to a job, a headhunter reaches out to you and they say, hey, I've got this position for you, and they seem like they're acting on your behalf. But the reality is that they're trying to get a placement with the company because that's how they get paid. And if that job doesn't work out for whatever reason, that headhunter has a lot less incentive to work closely with you because they probably don't have another job order with your background. So what that means is that you're likely going to have less and less engagement with that particular headhunter, and it may feel like they're dropping the ball. And of course, the headhunter will tell you, don't worry, we'll find you another job. There's positions that pop open all the time. And that might be the case, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it. And in fact, I would continue to look for jobs even if I was working with a recruiter. In other words, you're a free agent, you're in charge of your own job search, leverage the headhunter to help you, but you're still going to be doing most of the work yourself. The next very common myth that I see being propagated is the idea that your resume needs to be one page. Here's the deal, and let's set this one to bed permanently. Recruiters are not going to reject your resume if it's 2 pages or even 3 pages. They may not even reject it if it's 4 pages long. But what we want to do is have a concise resume. And when you have a resume that is 3, 4, 5 pages long, the chances of you being concise and telling your story and showing your fit is going to be extremely low. In other words, you're going to make it harder for yourself to get hired because you have so much junk that you're putting in front of them that it's likely that they're not going to find what it is that they're looking for very quickly. And in a super competitive labor market where you're faced with potentially 1,000 other applicants, personally, I want to do everything I can to make sure that my resume is standing out from the competition, and I do that with concise resumes. Some resumes I see are great. They only need 1 page. Some need 2. It doesn't really matter so long as you're being concise and telling your story in an effective and clear way. So don't get hung up on the number of pages. We really don't care so long as we can find what it is that we're looking for. So the quality of the information that you're putting on there is going to be much more important, and the formatting that you use will just help us find what it is that we're looking for that much quicker and easier. The final myth that I see, and this one is very frustrating for the average job seeker, is that they assume that hiring managers are very skilled interviewers. The reality is that a vast majority of hiring managers that I've worked with have never been formally trained. In fact, a lot of the people that I've worked with have never even hired anybody before, and I have to act as more of a consultative guide for them. So I always ask in my intake calls, have you actually interviewed before? And if they haven't, I have to give them a crash course on how to actually approach the interview process. And sometimes I will even help them build out the interview guides that they'll be working off of. But I'd say a good 70% of interviewers that you'll be meeting with don't actually know how to professionally interview. And that's kind of scary. So when you assume that these companies know how to hire people, They honestly probably don't. And there's a higher degree of interview skill that's needed when you're interviewing for a company where the employer doesn't really know what they're doing. Now, this isn't a blanket statement because I will say there are some companies who are very professional with their hiring and training up of their hiring managers on how to interview and how to use the hiring systems and tools. So make sure you have a very tight interview strategy if you're going into some of these interviews. You don't want to just assume that the interviewer doesn't know what they're doing, because there are some very adept ones out there too. Anyway, I hope this clears some of the hiring misconceptions up. I feel like a lot of people are struggling and kind of grasping at straws to make some sense of a very crazy job market. And frankly, it's not really helping people. But if you do need more help with your job search, that's actually something that I specialize in. I have a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with recruiting tips and tricks. And I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. Remember, we talked about resumes and the importance of having a targeted resume so that you can get the recruiter to notice you. And that's where Resume Rocketfuel comes in. If you're unsure of whether or not your resume is targeted and concise and well written, you should take resume writing very seriously and stop trying to outsource it to somebody else. This is a core career skill that everybody should know. So I created the Resume Rocketfuel course to teach you exactly how to write a resume that is going to give you the best chance at getting that phone call to get into the interviewing process. And once you get into the interview process, it's then up to you to market yourself through each round of the interview process, because frankly, it can be a gauntlet. And that's where the ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in, because it's going to give you strategies for each round, how to approach it, how to position yourself to be the candidate who gets selected for the job offer. And once you get to the job offer, we teach you how to make sure that you don't leave any money on the table. And if you want to skip the recruiter altogether, that's the preferable method, because it's a lot easier to get into the interviewing process when the recruiter is coming and finding you than it is for you to send out application after application and potentially just keep getting rejected. And that's where the Unlocking LinkedIn course comes in. And I teach you how to leverage the tool to get the recruiters to start taking notice of you. And even more importantly, how to skip them altogether. So if you're interested in learning how to leverage targeted networking, for example, Unlocking LinkedIn is the course for you. And if you need more personalized help, I do offer some limited one-on-one coaching. You can reach me through my website for that. Anyway, I appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.